Now I'd like to introduce Heather Gallegos, Community Relations Leader for Michigan Operations of the Dow Chemical Company. In this role, Heather is responsible for building and fostering strategic relationships with key stakeholders in the Great Lakes Bay region and leading community outreach efforts that support the well-being of the community and strengthen Dow's reputation.
Thank you, Patrick. The Dow Chemical Company is proud to sponsor today's event and is a great supporter of the work of Saginaw Future. Dow is committed to the economic development efforts of the Great Lakes Bay region, and we look forward to new projects and growth. We have touched on a number of Saginaw County and regional thought leaders who work for a better future of us all. We have an additional thought leader here with us today, focused on the entire state of Michigan. Today's featured speaker is Doug Rothwell, President and CEO of Business Leaders for Michigan. The organization's mission is to make Michigan a top 10 state for economic growth, and his board consists of CEOs and senior executives from the state's largest employers, including the Dow Chemical Company. He founded both Business Leaders for Michigan and the Michigan Economic Development Corporation, which have become two of the most prominent organizations driving the state's economy. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to introduce Doug Rothwell, President and CEO of Business Leaders for
Michigan. Good afternoon, everybody. Everybody's feeling good, not going to fall asleep on me here after this big meal, I hope. You know, I at some risk, I'm going to do something that I hate to do in a way, because there are so many folks here that I've met over my 25 years in Michigan that I could call out and thank for all your help and support over the years. But there are two people that really I think I need to single out. You know, in the days that we're in today, where it feels like nobody can get along, and you know, elected officials either have the attitude where it's my way or the highway, and Republicans can't get along with Democrats and vice versa. There's an elected official that you have in this community who constantly works for solutions and does not do so from ideology, but just for things that work. And somebody that I admire, and somebody that I wish we could clone and have about 20 or 30 more of them in Michigan, and that's Senator Ken Horn. And the other person is your leader. I've known Joanne Crary for the full 25 years I've been in Michigan. There is nobody who I feel more passionate about in terms of somebody that has done a terrific job for the region, and somebody that you will be very hard-pressed to ever replace. And so I say this because it's oftentimes when those leaders are there that you don't appreciate them fully. And you have such a leader right now. And she may not always be there, but she's here today, and she has done a terrific job for this community. I'm privileged to call her a friend. And Joanne, thank you so much for your service. Okay, I got to get on with the show here. So Joanne has told me I have 18 minutes now to do a 35-minute presentation, and so I will do my best to blow through this thing. So let's see. So you've already heard a little bit about who we are. Basically, an organization made up of the 80 or so most senior executives that run the largest companies in the state, and those 80 companies represent about a third of the state's economy. So we have a pretty good feel for what we think needs to be done to grow jobs and investment. We basically do four things. We try to do what we do based on facts, come up with strategies that we think make sense to reach our goals. We try to raise awareness through going to meetings like this, and then advocate for those changes in Lansing with folks like Ken Horn, and try to actually maybe even run some programs where it makes sense to get things done. You heard about our goal. It's to be a top 10 state. We view that specifically in terms of raising personal income levels to that threshold, as well as the number of jobs we have, and then also being a top 10 state for population and gross domestic product. And here's why that matters. I mean, just if you kind of bring it down to an individual level, we'd all be making about $10,000 more today individually if we were a top 10 state. And that's really a symbol of how we need to just create more good-paying jobs in Michigan. And so how do we do that is what we're about. And I guess what I'd like to say is I think we're at a critical point right now in Michigan's history because we're really kind of at a juncture where we've had a nice little run here for the last 6 or 7 years. We've called the comeback state, and I think that's absolutely true. But on the other hand, I think it's uncertain where we go from here. Because if you look at Michigan's past, it hasn't always been a straight line. It's been more of an up and down ski slope that we've been on. So, we have to remember that we are digging ourselves out still from a pretty big hole that we created back in the 2000s. No state lost more population and wealth and income than we did, which you'll see in a second. And as I said, even though we've had some progress, there are some long-term challenges that we face that I'm going to talk about and then outline a few ideas for how we might move forward. We have a plan that's called the Plan for a Stronger Michigan. You can go online and find it at our website. And as I said, it's really based on what we think works. Not so much, what we think, but actually what works. What have other states done? What does the data say about what we need to do to move forward? And it's really broken down into 3 simple steps. We need to do things to make sure that our state remains competitive from both a cost and a value standpoint, but that we also make strategic investments in our future, just like you would as a business. You can't grow just by cutting, you've also got to grow by investing. And then where can we really leapfrog other states in terms of growth to get back to top 10 levels? So let's take a look at where we stand in the Michigan economy right now. I'm going to first of all talk about what we see in terms of other top 10 states. What do they look like? What are their characteristics? And there's a couple here that you can read, but the 2 that I want to really point out is that the one characteristic that we've nailed pretty well in the last 5 or 6 years of being more competitive. Okay, I mean, you can't really find any data right now that shows Michigan is not a cost competitive state. Our tax structure is in good shape, which I'll show you in a second. We manage our finances well. The issue that we really have is being consistent, not just in terms of our competitiveness, but acting cohesively, distinctively, and innovatively over a period of years. And you could pick almost any policy issue in Michigan and you could use that as an example. Education policy, for example. We set standards and assessments for our kids, and then a couple of years from then we change our minds and we change them, and then we keep them for a couple of years, and then we change our minds and we change them again. Economic development. Some years we want to get into the business attraction business and really be aggressive in bringing companies to the state, and then some years we decide, we're just going to grow our own and forget all of that. I say it because other people around the country pay attention to this stuff. And they look at us and they say, if I come to Michigan, what am I getting? Am I going to get the same thing this year that I think I'm going to get 5 years from now? And that's why consistency is important and why I think an organization like ours is important in terms of providing kind of some rudder, if you will, on the ship of state to make sure we stay at things year after year. Let's look at where we stand in real terms. Talked about our goal of being top 10. You hear the governor, you hear everybody talk a lot about Michigan's comeback, and it's true. We've had top 10 growth for the last few years, but the important point here is that look at where we actually stand on actual rankings. 30th in employment, 31st per capita income, 33rd per capita GDP. I point this out not to depress you. I point it out to fire you up. That, things are better, but average, which is what these are, average scores, still isn't nearly good enough and provides a lot of opportunity for us on the upside to really do better by the state and also for us in our individual families. So again, as I mentioned, 30th in unemployment rate. This is the area we've made the most progress in over the last half dozen years. You can see the blue line is Michigan, the black line is our peer average states, and then the orange line are the top 10 states. We've really almost closed the gap. But this is a chart I think is kind of interesting. If you look at Michigan's contribution to the overall national economy, the percent of the GDP that we represent as a state, if you go back to the 2000 period, we represented about almost 3.5% of the nation's GDP. Right now we're at 2%. And what that means is that if we had just stayed at that level, there would be $110 billion more of economic production coming out of this state that we see today, $110 billion. Think about it in terms of personal income. If we had maintained at the national average the personal income levels in Michigan, there'd be $50 billion more in everybody's pocket today than we saw even just 10 or 15 years ago. And then if you look at just in terms of our population, what we represented back in 1980 was 4% of the U.S. population. Today is 3%. The difference of that 1% is 2.5 million people. So we'd be a state of 12.5 million people had we just been at the national average since 1980. So I say all that to say this whole issue of trying to be top 10 is really a big freaking deal, because it means that there is a huge amount of opportunity for us to still go at it. Let's look at some of the factors that indicate how those measures that I just talked about may be occurring and maybe what they might look like in the future. We call them input measures, and we break them down into two categories. Those that relate to adding to our cost structure, how cost competitive we are, and then those that would indicate what kind of value you get for the money for being here. And we think that's a real important juxtaposition, because that's what you as consumers and businesses look for all the time. Where's the most value I can get for my money? So Michigan is clearly a cost value state. Eighth best corporate tax climate in America, 12th best overall business tax climate in America. This is where we've made the big progress, the big leaps. Here's where we've got some issues though. When you start talking about the value you get for money in Michigan, 29th on career and college readiness is the percentage of our kids that are deemed to meet that standard in the 11th grade. 42nd in terms of the percentage of our kids that are enrolled in some type of career or tech education enrollment. 30th for our overall education attainment levels. Infrastructure. This on the left side, you see Michigan in the blue. This is the percentage of state and local spending on infrastructure as it relates to overall spending. We're at 6%. The national average is at 10%. Even Ohio is spending 20% more than we are. And then on the right-hand side, what you see is kind of where it breaks down by that spending by transportation, water, and energy. The point being is, we all know our roads aren't very good. We know we have some water infrastructure problems. Well, you kind of get what you pay for. And we're a northern state. We're a state that has a lot more challenges in this regard than other places, and even the states around us are doing more. And so that's why, we just feel that there needs to be more investment in this area. And of course, you see it in terms of our rankings on urban roads. Even on broadband, which is, again, a priority for the administration and the legislature to address, we have many areas of the state that just don't have the level of service that they need. We're doing better in terms of the levels of investment we put in trying to grow the economy through economic development. We're about at the national average. And we've got some real strengths that we need to leverage even more. We score quite high in terms of our level of the number of U.S. patents that we generate, and also the amount of research and development that goes on at our major universities, ranking 5th. So all of that says is that we've got these issues still. We've made a lot of progress, but now what's our direction? Are we going to kind of rest on our laurels and say, okay, let's feel good, we've come back, that's enough, average is okay? Or are we going to say, average really isn't okay, that we really can be much better than that, and we're going to accelerate, we're going to push even harder to move forward. And the reason why that's important is that there are still challenges outside of our domain which we still need to face as a state. Out-migration is a big one. Population loss is a big one. Michigan has slowed its net population decline. Okay, we're now about stable. We're actually growing population just a little bit. But if you look at the out-migration that's occurring from Michigan-born residents, it's still occurring almost as it was before the recession. So the only reason we've been maintaining population largely is because we've gotten immigration coming into the state to make up for it. But that out-migration is still one of the largest net losses of any state in the country. And the forecast is it's probably going to continue. This chart shows Essentially, the darker blue areas are the areas of the country that are projected to grow the fastest between now and 2030. You don't see many of those blue, dark blue areas, particularly in Michigan, which means that we are still at great risk of a pull of people coming out of our state. This chart in blue are industries that you would consider established industries, like manufacturing. The green are industries that are in the growth areas, technology sectors, service sectors. The larger the bubble, the bigger the industry, and to the right of the line in the middle of the chart are the industries that are growing faster than the national average, and on the left are those that are growing slower than the national average. This is Michigan. And what you see is that there are more established industry sectors growing faster than the national average in Michigan than the emerging sectors. And even though, as was mentioned earlier, manufacturing and automotive and all those are still very, very important to Michigan, we're not really getting as much of our fair share of the emerging piece of the economy as we should be. And unfortunately, those are sometimes some of the highest paying jobs that are being created in America today. And the other challenge we have is what resources we have to invest in ourselves to try to grow the future. This chart basically shows in the solid line the actual level of the state budget, the general fund budget that's available, and the dotted line is the one that's adjusted for inflation. And what this tries to show is basically, as Ken knows, the amount of money the state has to spend on education, the environment, investments in economic development has basically not changed since way back in the 1980s. So the $10 billion budget that we have today is basically, for inflation adjusted, the same as it was 30 years ago. You think of it from a business standpoint. How many of you in your business, if you had the same revenues that you had 30 years ago, how do you think you'd be doing? Probably not real well. And that's why you see some of the things that we need to invest in today not getting invested in because we just don't have the revenue to do it. So let's talk about where we go from here. Well, first of all is to recognize that there has been a tremendous amount of work done, again, in the last 6 to 7 years in particular, addressing the very things that I've been talking about up here today. A lot of progress, and it's a reason why we've gotten where we are. This blue line tries to show where we rank overall as a state in terms of our progress towards being top 10. We started out back in 2010 around 45th in the country, dead last on a lot of measures, and now we've risen back to actually being, in the middle of the pack. Well, that correlates very closely to the progress we've made implementing the kinds of strategies and suggestions that, we've been making as an organization and that have been followed by the administration and the legislature. But what you see is that we've done probably more in terms of getting cost competitive, more implementation on that side than on the side of really things we need to do to invest and grow the economy. And here are some suggestions we have for maybe where we think we need to go in the immediate term. First of all is locking in place all the great work that has been done to make Michigan financially stronger. A lot of that work has been done not in law but in practice. And so getting budgets done by June 30th. Issuing fiscal report cards that you and I can understand as opposed to just the auditors that audit the books. Making sure that we can have good legislation that has price tags on it, that the legislators understand what the implications are of passing a law. Those things are things that are being done, but they're not codified to the degree we would like to see so that the next administration, the next legislature doesn't go back to the bad old days. So let's lock those in place. In terms of investing, it's all about talent. And so it means making sure that we have a stronger K-12 system to correct some of those scores that I showed you earlier. It's making sure that we have a job training system that's responsive and flexible and providing training for companies on demand when they need it, the way they need it. And it's also making sure that we have a higher education system that's affordable for kids to go to and that we invest enough in it to keep tuition down. The other is infrastructure. And that means that basically we need to raise taxes, or be right, raise taxes to pay for things like our roads and our water systems. We are simply not generating the level of money that we should be. The state, the legislature is doing the best they can by taking money out of the general fund to help pay for some of that, but we know that's not the long-term answer, because we've got to depend on the operating budget for a lot of things. And so that means we're going to have to go back and raise gas taxes and registration fees and things like that, because it is the resources we need to get ourselves connected in this global world, to get around. And then the third side of the columns here is making sure that we don't politicize economic development, that we realize that we need to compete in a global world, and that we shouldn't be going one year big on business attraction and next year big on business retention, and next year not doing anything. We got to make sure that we realize that we shouldn't let politics get in the way. And then last is to, really do more with what Michigan is so good at. These are 6 examples of assets that we have. We call them assets that Michigan just excels at. And what we need to do is to make sure that we are doing the things to grow these sectors of our economy. We're doing it well in some areas. Travel's an example with the Pure Michigan campaign. Mobility is an example with what we're doing to try to help the auto industry make this great transformation to a new world. But there are a lot of other areas, too, that we could be working on even harder. And we think these are ones that really give Michigan a competitive edge compared to a lot of other states, and gives us hope for how we could be a top 10 state. So, at the end of the day, this work is not work that can be done just by myself, our organization, by Joanne, by Ken. It was going to take a team effort to make this happen. And so, some of the things that we're trying to do, you see up here on the left, some things you can do are on the right. The point basically is that we all are citizens. We all have power. We all have influence. And too often, I think, people think that they don't have those things, and that, it's only big organizations or big associations that can really make a difference. And I don't believe that. I mean, Ken would be the first one to say that if 10 individuals call his office with a problem, all of a sudden it's a crisis, because we don't hear from average citizens nearly as much as we need to. And so my encouragement to you is to get engaged, particularly with this big election that's coming up. Make sure that the candidates that are running are people that are reasonable and smart and open-minded and frankly, model Ken's example. That's the kind of elected leaders you need, and we need more of them in office. So with that, I'm going to shut up and keep Joanne on time, and hopefully enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks so much for having me.